mercy or murder? Hello, I'm Vivian Schenker and this is Insight. While it's been happening quietly for years, the first legal...
Government-owned service runs 3 times a day in each direction. Today it's 10 minutes late leaving, and although the weather's fine and the driver's pushing the Explorer to the speed limit, there's no chance of picking up time.
We're up to 140 down the bottom of this hill. I hope to get 140.
The train is modern enough, but the track is winding and in constant need of repair. So by the time the train reaches Goulburn, 1/3 of the way to Sydney, it's dropped another 7 minutes behind. The schedule may say it's a 4-hour trip. In reality, is more like 4.5 hours tops, 1 full hour slower than a car. But now it's likely the colonial engineering of the line will soon be superseded by the super-fast technology of the late 20th century, if not that of the early 21st.
This is an exciting new development. It's a very major infrastructure project that would be one of the biggest projects the country's seen in many a long year.
This train, the TGV Atlantic, runs every day between Paris and the west coast of France at 300 kilometers per hour.
This is the type of train the front-running group, the Speedrail Consortium, wants to introduce to Australia. It's powered by 2 electric locomotives supplied by overhead power lines. This is proven technology, already running on thousands of kilometres of European lines.
Our plan is to provide a very high quality, very fast, very attractive rail service between Sydney and Canberra, taking 1 hour and 20 minutes from Sydney Central to a station in Canberra, probably at the airport. Fares about half of airfares and matching the airline on various discounts, and a very frequent service, a train every hour or more often.
However, Speedrail does not have the game all to itself. This is the futuristic magnetic levitation technology of a rival consortium, Transrapid, which the group claims could reach speeds of more than 500 kilometres per hour.
Approximately a half-inch of space is maintained between the vehicle and the guideway. Levitation magnets in the vehicle attract it upward to the guideway. The super-speed maglev train is propelled by a linear motor mounted guideway instead of in the vehicle. The Transrapid maglev system uses no wheels, levitating contact-free, thereby requiring less energy and producing less noise.
The first maglev line in Germany is not scheduled to go into operation until 2005, and I simply don't think that investors would accept the technology risk in Australia of adopting a system which hasn't yet been adopted and proven in its country of origin.
Transrapid exists, it is operational, it's operating around a test track in northern Germany. It has been fully proven, it has been certified by the German government for commercial operation. It has been included in the German Master Transportation Plan and has been selected for the Hamburg-Berlin link.
Suddenly, sleepy old Canberra railway station finds itself at the centre of an emerging global battle between 2 of the world's largest corporate entities, one French-British, the other German. On one hand, GEC Alstom, the maker of French TGV trains, is backing Speedrail. It says it wants 40% of the equity in the company and says it will put $200 million up front on the table, an estimated $2 billion or so the Sydney-Canberra link will cost. On the other hand, 3 of Germany's 4 biggest companies, Daimler-Benz, Thyssen and Siemens, are backing Transrapid. They're currently looking for Australian partners. If the Germans can get here, then that opens the way for further lucrative lines in the United States, Asia and even Latin America. But But at this stage, the French-British-backed Speedrail must as favourite.
Simply by the fact that Speedrail has been there, they'd have to be considered an early favourite, but one cannot draw any assumptions that Speedrail will be the final winners in all of this, because there may be other people with similar or slightly different proposals, or other people with totally different technology that may be seen to be more appropriate for the future.
The X2000 tilt train.
Speedrail has already seen off its first challenger, a Swedish tilt train promoted by New South Wales Rail to run on existing tracks. But now the state government has abandoned the concept. Earlier this month, voiced support for a private enterprise solution, provided financial capability and viability can be demonstrated, and the project won't burn taxpayers. The federal government has similar criteria.
In principle, we support the idea, subject to some pretty sensible criteria, such as that people who are affected by its construction or operation are adequately compensated, that it meets environmental and heritage guidelines, and it also, of course, is fully privately funded and operated.
All three governments now support the project because it could help relieve the population pressure on Sydney, power regional development, attract investment and create jobs. That's why the federal government is likely to grant access to infrastructure bonds for the project. It believes that $200 million in foregone revenue would be made up from other revenue generated by the project. That sounds pretty good to the people of Goulburn. The population of Australia's oldest inland city has fallen more than 7% in the last few years.
Well, I hope that it'll bring more employment, better jobs, and also I hope a better life for Goulburn. And in the future, with the international airport, we're looking for that too.
In fact, John Sharp has all but ruled out an international airport for his hometown. But just yesterday, he announced a $1 million feasibility study for a proposed Canberra International Airport. That would take pressure off Sydney Airport, not to mention off the federal government.
We believe by upgrading our airport, not to full international status, we're not looking at being Sydney's second airport, but being able to handle charters, being able to handle 747s under certain circumstances. We believe that, plus the very fast train, will really take a lot of pressure off Sydney and of course bring business jobs to Canberra and the region.
I think the airport needs the railway more than the other way around, but there is a symbiotic or synergistic or something relationship between the two. We've done our studies and will continue to do them without relying on an airport anywhere along the route.
It's easy to see why government approved the Sydney to Canberra rail link. It could power a new era in decentralisation, all paid for by private enterprise. But what about Transrapid and Speedrail themselves? Why are they talking Sydney to Canberra and not Sydney to Melbourne via Canberra?
The only way it'll actually pay is if it's connecting major centres together. I don't see that it makes much sense to simply connect Sydney to Canberra.
Not surprisingly, the Victorian government agrees.
It's always been the case that a link from Melbourne through to Sydney would go through Canberra. So we'd see that as stage one of a two-stage process, and we're saying do it properly, well, and eventually we will then be able to link through a VFT from, the two main capital cities, one to the other, and that would be a good thing for this nation, and that's something this government is red hot keen to achieve.
Speedrail maintains that the Sydney-Canberra line is simply a far easier financing task at $2 billion than the almost $6 billion needed for Sydney to Melbourne, and Transrapid accepts this logic. Yet this tunnel could help Speedrail get approval for the entire fast train network. It's the new Southern Railway, an underground line being built from Sydney Central to Mascot Airport's domestic and international terminals.
One of the great advantages of the TGV is that the train is compatible with the track, same track gauge, same overhead electricity supply. It can run anywhere on the Sydney suburban network, or we can run, for example, through through the airport line and access those ground airport stations. There is no way that the magnetic levitation system can serve the airport stations.
Well, that's no problem. The maglev has what's called a bivalent track, bivalent guideway, which enables it to share track with existing wheel-on-track trains.
However, laying the bivalent guideway would mean placing existing tracks, which is expensive and inconvenient. This advantage alone could see Speedrail win government approval, first for Canberra to Sydney and ultimately for the whole network, unless we see the 19th century fiasco of different rail gauges meeting at Albury replicated in the 21st century at Canberra. And yet outside the cities, Transrapid's claims to higher speeds, consuming less energy with lower environmental impact, have impressed groups like the Australian Conservation Foundation.
The fact that there's a softer ecological footprint, the train's elevated, so the passage of wildlife can continue. The fact that it requires very little maintenance. The fact also that it does seem, from the information we have, that it's very high fuel equivalent energy efficiency.
Yet the environment will be a relatively low priority on the initial project, as both groups say they will follow the Hume Highway down to Goulburn and then the Federal Highway to Canberra. But rejoining the Hume Highway corridor as it stretches from Goulburn to Melbourne is more problematic. To the west and south of Canberra, the Australian Alps aren't a major engineering challenge, they're an insurmountable political one. The mountains are an unbroken chain of national parks. One option is to follow the Button Highway back to the Hume, which would be expensive and time-consuming. The other is to head south and then west. But this was the original route proposed by the VFT back in the 80s, and it fell foul of the environmentalists.
Nobody seems to be looking closely at the environmental impacts as something that should be considered very seriously in the tendering process.
The ACF is adamant it won't endorse either group before full environmental studies are completed. Nevertheless, it says it would be unfortunate to award the Canberra-Sydney link without considering the implications for the rest of the network.
Absolutely, and this is precisely the philosophy that we would like to see changed, that you don't implement a technology or a development proposal anywhere because there is a short-term gain. You must look at the longer-term impacts, the long-term and real costs over time if you are going to make the correct decision.
John Sharp says environment and heritage issues will play a role in deciding the successful consortium, yet he believes the final decider is more likely to be money.
Well, the true test of whether the project is a real go is nothing that governments will do, it's whether people are prepared to put their money on the table.
It seems the days of the 4.5-hour rail trip may soon be a thing of the past. The fast train link is now closer to becoming a reality than it has ever been before. The three relevant governments will soon declare a 12-month period for interested parties to prepare detailed submissions. The last of the government barriers are falling. Now it's up to the private enterprise groups to demonstrate they can make it work. That, and coming up a little matter of $2 billion.
And isn't it nice to know that Chris Hammer finally made it to his destination?